4 days before Christmas, my son called and said something I never expected to hear from my own child. "Dad, don't come up this year. Melissa isn't comfortable with it." I was 63 years old, standing in the kitchen of my new apartment in Victoria, British Columbia, watching December rain fall on the dark water of the Strait. I'd moved here 8 months earlier after selling the house in Toronto, the house where my kids grew up, where I'd spent 20 years trying to build something that would last longer than the marriage. I came west because I needed a different sky, because Victoria felt like the kind of place where a man could quietly figure out who he still was. "Curtis," I said carefully, "I've already booked the flight." "I know, I'm sorry. It's just, Melissa's family is coming in from Edmonton. A lot of people in a small space. She doesn't think the timing is right." There were 8 words I wanted to say. I swallowed all of them. "I see," I said. "You understand, right?" I told him I understood. Then I hung up and stood at the window long enough for the rain to change direction twice. I'm 68 now. I'm telling you this with 5 years between me and that phone call. 5 years that rearranged everything I thought I knew about family and belonging and where love actually comes from. Back then, I didn't have that distance. I just had the rain and a booked flight I'd have to cancel, and the particular silence of a man who has been told, politely but clearly, that he is not wanted. My daughter called that same evening. Her voice had the careful warmth she used when she was trying to soften something she hadn't caused. "Come to Halifax for Christmas, Dad. Ben and I would love to have you." I almost said yes, but Halifax was 4 hours in the opposite direction, and something in me was tired of arranging myself around people who were willing to have me. I told her I'd be fine in Victoria. She didn't push, but before she hung up she said, "You can call me anytime. I mean it." I did know that. It was the one thing I had never doubted about her. Christmas morning, I put on my good wool sweater, the gray one I'd bought for a trip I was no longer taking, and walked to a diner 3 blocks from my apartment. The kind of place that stays open on holidays because somebody has to. Vinyl booths, a counter with stools, a blinking plastic Christmas tree in the corner. The hostess seated me near the back with a laminated menu and a tired smile. And I ordered coffee at the full breakfast and opened the Thomas King novel I'd brought, because I'd known I would need something to look at besides other people's families. There were families in that diner. There always are on days like that. I was halfway through my eggs when the woman in the booth beside me leaned around the partition. She was in her mid-70s, silver hair pulled back neatly, with the direct gaze of someone who had long ago decided that timidity was a waste of everyone's time. "Thomas King," she said, nodding at the book. "Good choice for Christmas Day." "My wife used to say he was for every season," I said. She had good taste. "Is she joining you?" "We've been divorced for 12 years. The woman nodded, unbothered. "My husband and I are right there in the next booth. We'd love the company if you'd want to join us. No obligation, but it's Christmas." I looked at my half-eaten eggs, then at her, then I said yes. Her name was Edith Mackay. Her husband Roland was a retired civil engineer who'd spent 30 years with the federal government, quiet and deliberate, with the kind of handshake that tells you something real about a person. They'd been in Victoria for 22 years. 3 children, scattered from Ottawa to Vancouver Island. They weren't bitter about the distance. They adapted. That was the word Roland used, without self-pity, just as a fact. We sat in that diner for 2 hours. I told them more than I'd told anyone in months. The shape of things, not the raw parts. The divorce, the move, the Christmas phone call. Edith listened the way certain people do, with their full attention, not planning ahead, just actually present. When I finally mentioned that my son had told me not to come, she set down her coffee cup. "His loss," she said, simply, not unkindly, just clearly. I thought about those 2 words for a long time after. Before we left, she wrote on the back of a coffee receipt and pressed it across the table. An address in the Fairfield neighborhood, and below it, "Sunday dinners at 5. You're welcome anytime." No phone number, just the address, and an invitation made on faith. The following Sunday, I drove past that address 4 times before I finally parked the car and knocked. Edith answered before I'd finished knocking. Behind her, the house smelled like roast chicken and rosemary and something warm happening in the kitchen. There was a child's voice somewhere, and a hockey broadcast, and someone laughing. "You came," she said, and her face did something I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. It lit up. That was the beginning. The Sunday dinners became the fixed point around which my week turned. Roland and I started going to the Moss Street market on Saturday mornings. Their youngest daughter lived in Langford with her husband and 2 kids, and she started treating me like a mildly wayward uncle who showed up reliably and never left without doing the dishes. The older grandchild, a girl of about 5 named Ivy, serious and precise in the way that small children sometimes are, started calling me Mr. Neal, then just Neal, then Grandpa Neal somewhere around month 7. The first time she said it, I excused myself to the back garden for a few minutes. By the end of the first year, there was a hook on the wall of their guest room where I hung my jacket and a tin of Earl Grey in the cupboard that nobody else touched. I was chosen. Every Sunday they chose me. That's the most extraordinary thing I can say about that time. If you're still reading, comment "I'm here," and let me know what you would have done in my place. Because what happens next is the part I almost didn't survive, and it started with a phone call I should have seen coming. My son called on a Tuesday afternoon in March, about 15 months after that Christmas. His voice had the texture of someone who had spent several days preparing for this. He asked about Victoria. He asked about the part-time job I'd taken at a hardware store on Douglas Street. He asked how Christmas had been. "Better than expected," I said. Then he got to it. He and his wife had taken on a variable rate mortgage when rates were low, and rates had since climbed sharply. Anyone following the Bank of Canada knew how that story had gone. They were stretched. They'd also put money into a friend's business that hadn't delivered. He needed $35,000 to bridge the gap. He'd repay it when he could. I sat with that number for a moment. "Have you talked to a mortgage specialist?" I asked. "What you're describing, a lot of people are restructuring right now. There are options." "I'm not calling for advice," he said. "I'm calling because we need the money." "I can't do that, Curtis." The silence was brief and precise. "You sold the house," he said. "You told me what you cleared." "I did, and I've made decisions with that money. It's my stability. I'm not putting that at risk." "This is your son," he said. "This is my family." "I know. And I'm saying no because I love you enough to be honest. $35,000 won't solve the underlying problem. You need a professional, not my savings." He tried several more angles. He said his mother had always told him I put myself first. He said moving to Victoria while my grandchildren were growing up in Toronto was its own kind of abandonment. He said his wife's family was watching how this played out. I let him say all of it without interrupting. "I'm here if you want to talk," I said when he finished. "Not about money, about how you're actually doing, but I won't give you the $35,000. There was a pause. "Then don't call me," he said. "Don't come to anything. Don't contact me again. As far as I'm concerned, you don't exist in my life." He hung up. I stood in the hardware store parking lot for a long time after. A thin February rain, the kind that can't decide if it wants to be fog. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was something quieter and older than both of those things. That evening, I drove to the Fairfield house and sat at the kitchen table while Edith made tea. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she put a mug in front of me and sat down. "He's in pain," she said. "That's real. But making yourself responsible for his pain isn't the same as loving him. You know that. You've always known that." She was right. Knowing the difference was what made it hurt. My daughter called when she heard. She'd been maintaining careful contact with her brother for years, trying to hold both relationships without becoming a messenger for either. When she heard what had happened, she said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." She paused. I know that doesn't make it easier. It didn't, but it mattered that she said it. 4 years passed. 4 years of Sunday dinners and Saturday mornings at Moss Street, and fishing trips with Roland in the summers off the southern tip of the island. 4 years of watching Ivy lose her baby teeth and start grade 1 and then grade 2. 4 years of being handed the phone at Christmas to hear a small voice say Grandpa Neal before handing it back. 4 years of building something real and daily in mine. My son did not call. In October of the 4th year, my daughter called with news. She and Ben were getting married in the spring. 6 years together, and they were making it official. She wanted me in the front row for all of it. The wedding would be in Victoria. She'd chosen it specifically so I wouldn't have to travel. I cried when she told me. I didn't pretend otherwise. She also told me gently that she'd invited her brother. She said she'd been in occasional contact with him. The odd text, a birthday message. She said he knew pieces of my life in Victoria but not the whole picture. She needed to invite him because he was her brother, and she needed him to see what I'd built. She hoped I understood. I understood, I told her so. The ceremony was at a heritage venue in James Bay. Exposed beams, high windows, afternoon light coming in long and gold. She wore a cream dress with small flowers at the collar, and when she walked toward Ben, his face changed in a way I won't forget. The reception was in the adjoining hall. The McKays sat at a table near the front. Edith, in her good blue dress. Roland in the only suit I'd ever seen him wear. Both of them crying openly through the vows and apologizing to nobody for it. Ivy had been given the title of Junior Flower Girl and was treating the role like a federal appointment. I was on the dance floor with Edith, Roland watching from the edge with the tolerant amusement he'd developed over decades of her dancing with various partners. When I saw him, my son was standing just inside the entrance to the hall. His suit was slightly too warm for a May evening. He looked older than I'd prepared myself for, grayer at the temples, something heavier around the eyes. He'd come alone. I noticed that immediately. He saw me at roughly the same moment. He saw me, and then he saw Edith beside me, and Roland moving toward us from the edge of the room, and Ivy waving from across the hall in my direction with her whole arm. I watched his face work through something I didn't have a name for. The music played. I walked toward him slowly, without urgency, the way you approach something that might be fragile. "Hi," I said. "Hi." He looked at me, then at the room. I didn't know how much of a life you had here. Your sister didn't tell you everything." No, a pause. She was right not to. We stood there. Around us people moved and laughed and refilled their glasses. "Those people," he said, looking toward where Edith and Roland now stood with a group of guests. "They're not just friends. No, they're my family. They've been my family for 4 years." Something moved through his face, the recognition of a man who understands, too late and too clearly, what he chose to walk away from. "I made mistakes," he said. "You did." "I'm not asking for anything," he added quickly. "I want you to know that. I'm just telling you." I looked at him for a long moment. My son. The boy who used to save me the corner piece of birthday cake because he knew I liked the extra icing. The teenager who called me from his first overnight camping trip because he couldn't sleep and didn't want his friends to know. The man who had, at some point, learned to treat love like a ledger. "I hear you," I said. "Is there any chance?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm not closing the door, but I'm not pretending the last 4 years didn't happen. And I'm not rebuilding something just to have it used again. What I can tell you is that I'm all right. Better than all right. And if you ever want a real relationship, not money, not favors, just an actual relationship, you know where I am." He nodded. After a moment, he turned and moved toward the bar. A while later, I noticed he'd left. My daughter found me on the terrace afterward. The May evening was still and warm, the harbor glittering below. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," I said. I meant it completely. She leaned her head against my shoulder the way she used to when she was small, and the world was confusing. We stood like that for a while, not talking, watching the lights. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday evening in June, I sat at the familiar table in the Fairfield house. Roland was carving a roast he'd been quietly proud of all day. Ivy was under the table, conducting an experiment involving a spoon and a glass of water. The back door was open to the garden, and the warm smell of a Victoria summer evening drifted in through the screen. I looked around that table, and I thought about the diner on Christmas morning. The coffee receipt with the address. The Sunday I'd parked outside this house 4 times before getting out of the car. I thought about my son at the wedding, and what I'd said, and what I'd meant. I thought about my daughter on the terrace. Family isn't the people who are obligated to you. It isn't blood. or history, or proximity, or the accident of being born into the same house. Family is the people who choose to show up. It's an address written on a receipt by someone who didn't know you yet but decided to trust you anyway. It's a hook on a guest room wall. It's a tin of tea in a cupboard that nobody else drinks. It's a small girl surfacing from under the table to announce that her experiment was a success, and everyone laughing without asking what the experiment was, because it doesn't matter. The laughing is the point. The staying is the point. The choosing each other every single Sunday is the point. I passed the roast to Roland. He refilled my glass without asking. The evening went on. We stayed at the table long after the food was gone, talking about nothing and everything, the way you do when you're finally exactly where you're supposed to be. I found home late. I found it in a diner on Christmas morning, from a woman who decided a stranger deserved a seat at her table. I held on to it, and I am not letting go.